quick interjection that I don't believe ADOS and critical race theory necessarily because critical race theories in a sense it creates the illusion of a flat blackness, whereas all black people's experiences are the same. So to try to use
That
ADOS
is
history
not true.
and I'm ADOS. I'm a supporter of ADOS reparations, all that. And I see where critical race theory is trying to reduce our history to just racism and create a flat blackness, whereas it in essence, and to the sister point that she made earlier, why I said great answer, like I don't support Kimberly Crenshaw. She doesn't speak for me, and I believe that intersectionality is just as detrimental to ADOS as racism, maybe more so detrimental than racism.
Yeah, that's great, Bo.
Can
Thank you
I
so much.
can I interject? Can I interject here for a sec? The
Go ahead, go
idea
ahead.
that I think one of the idea here that I'm trying to push back against vehemently is there's an insistence that is made for us to view the individual outside of their identity. So, for example, when you just say that Kimberly Crenshaw doesn't speak for you, you're saying that you're an individual and you want to be viewed as such. No one is denying a person of their individuality. No one is. But the point is that in a society where we live, people are viewed, are targeted based on their identity. When black people were enslaved, it's not because they were individual, but because they were black. That is the idea of we stigmatizing people based on their identity. So when people create laws against homosexual or transgender, it's not based on their individuality, but based on their identity. So even though you want to be viewed as an individual in society, that is just not tenable, because society laws are written to target individual and also their identity. So while you want to be viewed as individual, there's an identity component in which we are being stereotyped within society, and that is very undeniable. In last week only, there was, I think, while we might disagree or agree with it, there was 16 new legislation bring to the sign in states to about transgenderism and how it infecting society. So we can go around playing this individual game, but we have to identify that people are viewed based on their identity too. So we cannot remove the identity component of how society is constructed.
That's very good,
Okay.
Kevin. Thank you for sharing that.
And this is another problem, right? When we talk about historical contexts of slavery, while yes, black people were enslaved, to say that we were enslaved because we were black is also not entirely true, because during slavery, even if you look in the South, there were black, you had the freedmen, and you also had blacks who owned slaves, right? So slavery wasn't entirely predicated on blackness entirely. So there were nuances there's nuances within the discussion of slavery that can't just be minimized to just because we were black, we were slaves, or because there were slaves. I think it deserves a more nuanced discussion, and I think critical race theory takes away from that.
Okay.
That's great, Bo. Oh, Charles, go ahead.
Yeah. So let me just comment on that. I think that's a very good point that Bo made.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
And I think it's something that I've heard from Assault say too. Many Black Americans don't really agree with him, but it's something I've heard him that racism was not the reason for slavery, but rather racism came after to try to explain why humans will dehumanize other humans to the point of enslaving them. So it wasn't because they were black, that's why they were enslaved. Rather, slavery has been ubiquitous throughout human history. Different peoples have enslaved other peoples. In fact, I think they were even enslaving the native Indians before they brought in black slaves. the native Indians were already being enslaved, and probably because of the way they were dying and all that, they started bringing in black slaves. And I also believe that there were some white slaves as well in America throughout some point of the history of slavery. So I don't entirely agree with the position that people were enslaved solely for the color of the skin. That is to me, that is really not true. So that's what I just wanted to add.
And yeah, to that, Charles, and to what you had mentioned, Kevin.
Yeah, I would not. Sorry.
Oh no, it's all right. I just wanted to say, where we have as a group identity been lumped into certain divisions and segregation. I mean, most people are passionate about diffusing that for the sake of being individuals. That's why we had, the abolishing of slavery, starting with William Wilberforce way back. I believe it was 1833, and even then there was a natural angst against that. This is predating critical theory by almost 100 years, right? And then we go to 1865 and we move forward to the civil rights movement where we're abolishing Jim Crow. And so I believe that even without critical race theory, while it is a great legal school of thought that can be just looked at as a school of thought, it still isn't the arbiter of true justice and division. So or diffusing that division. So I totally hear you. I think what you brought up was a great point that a lot of people still need to think about.
So Isaac, go ahead. I'd like to hear your thoughts, Isaac.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Charles, and everybody. Kimmy, I've seen some of your I've seen some of your videos. It's quite a small world to see you here. I'd like to point out something that I think gets lost. Is that when we talk about critical race theory, we can talk about it as an analytical tool. But the question I have, and I think the question that's very important to when we're considering any kind of social critique, is what is the goal? And so we can say, oh, CRT rejects Marxism, but the world that they wish to create, as far as I understand it, is one that Marx could get on board with, or that an egalitarian philosopher like John Rawls could get on board with. The equalization of outcomes is very important. And I'm reading How to Be an Anti-Racist right now, and it's all over the place. Equality of difference is something that Kendi speaks of all the time. Equality of culture, equality of behavior.
But Kendi is not a critical race theorist. Kendi is a historian, not a critical race theorist.
I completely agree with you, Kevin, and I understand the distinction, but it is critical social constructivist history. Kendi wants equality of outcomes, equity. He would call it anti-racism. And I mean, that's what he wants. So I think we shouldn't get lost in the trees of method of the tool. We should see the forest of the goal.
Yes, I agree.
I disagree. I do not find Kendi work interested at all. I do not find Angela work interested at all. I just think their analysis is just too rudimentary and too superficial. However, I do see a lot of good, I would say. Yeah, but I am making this distinction here that I do. Yeah, so I'm saying that this is the point of critical race theory, is only people think critical race theory make prescriptive statement. In my reading of the theory, it makes descriptive statement, how we view stuff, how this can be analyzed. That's it. People can derive from it what they want to derive. Just like Marxism. Marxism is just a critique of capitalism. From that critique, you can derive socialism.
But Kevin, Marx said the point of philosophy is not to understand the world, but to change it. There's no point in making a description unless there's a prescription that goes along with it. I think that goes for any philosophical claim. Any ideology doesn't just want to say, "Oh, this is the way things are." It wants to say, "This is the way things ought to be."
But we can distinguish the prescription and the description. We can distinguish the prescription and the description.
No, you're right, Kevin.
Because I
agree.
With the prescription made by Karl Marx.
I asked you a question, Kevin. I said, what exactly are the merits of critical race theory? What particular benefits would we derive from studying this theory and understanding it and possibly implementing anything that it has to offer? Of what value is critical race theory currently in 2021?
All right, so are you familiar with the work, Kimi? Are you familiar with Judith Butler?
Not that well, no, but I'm familiar with the name, but no, I'm not familiar with her work.
All right, so Judith Butler was a gender theorist, right? She in her first book, Gender Trouble, she analyzed how gender is socially constructed and how we perform our gender role, irrespective of us making a conscious decision to do so. Now, from her theories, there has been a lot of movement. You have the queer theory, you have feminist, you have a lot of stuff that stemmed from her theory. Now, while you can disagree with the deduction made from her theory, you can say, okay, then she's right. Some of the prescription or description she made is right, and this is some of the issue I have here. We can disagree with something said, but understand its usefulness. I think when people put Marxism out of the water, they are unable to engage with the critique Marx make of capitalism, because and I think one in which Marx does effectively, and while he might be wrong on certain issue, I am not going to discard Marxism because he gets certain wrong. Like if you read Marx's theory of alienation, I agree with that theory 100%, in which in capitalism, how human is alienated from their labor and alienated from society. Because I grew up around my father. I did not grow up around my father. He have to work somewhere else because he wanted to support me. So while he was wrong and that socialism and communism is a natural evolution of capitalism, he was dead wrong on that point. But I think I am able to say he was correct here, he was wrong there. But to just throw out Marxism like that, I think it's just a disservice. And I think it's just that people are not willing.
Kevin, we're back to critical race theory.
To engage with the idea that Marx is put forward.
Kevin, okay, let us say we're not bringing Marx into this, we're discounting Marx. Marx has nothing to do with this. What are the particular merits of critical race theory today?
You hearing me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, but critical race theory stems from the idea of Marxism. Like it stems from critical theory. If we understand, if we want to understand critical race theory, we have to understand the Frankfurt School, in which how they portray capitalism as this undefeatable force that we're daily psyche, and how we get around that is not achievable. So when it comes to critical race theory, I think it adds that same mode of analysis. Hey, white supremacists, whiteness, unbeatable, and in a society we can do stuff to alleviate it, but we can never reduce it. Like if you're looking at criminal justice system, this stuff plays out exactly like the disparity between white conviction and those stuff is just there for us to say, okay, if we apply a critical race theory analysis to this, it provides a sort of explanation as to why this happened.
Okay, Isaac, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. I think there is a lot of value in critical theory. And Kevin, I know you think that Ibram Kendi is shallow But given that he's the guy these days, I think it's important to understand him. And I do think that there's a lot of value in
I don't disagree with
what critical race theory does in pointing out the disparities. If we didn't have data, if we didn't interrogate, we would never know, and we could never fix a problem we can't see. So in that way, it's absolutely right. Gosh, what did I want to say from here? Lose my train of thought. This is my first time on a panel discussion like this. Sorry about that.
No problem. No problem. So while we collect your thoughts, Bo or Kimi, do you want to jump in? Respond to what Kevin said.
Yeah. If she wanted to go, I'll follow behind her.
Yeah, Kevin. Here's the thing. Going back, I want to go back to my illustration of sort of only focusing on the text itself and not focusing on the outcome of those who adopt the text. If we go back to Mein Kampf, I think there's some texts where you have to look at what it produced in 10, 20 years. How did it affect those who took its tenets to heart? And so we look at Marxism, for example. Well, there's some concepts that you can say, yeah, I hear you there. Not everyone has the sort of self-control to just read it and absorb it and walk away. People get it and they get radicalized, and they have now a new outlook, which in and of itself tends to dehumanize people who are seen as the oppressor. So what we have had as a result of Marxism is genocide, is starvation, and the list could go on and on. What we've seen from the reading of Mein Kampf is one of the worst cases of just human violation ever. And what we are trying to stop right now is seeing the beginning of some sort of rift in American society, where critical race theory, while it is a text that we can look at, and not just a text, it's a school of thought, we are worried about where it's going to lead. So that is my concern with it, and that's why I'm vehemently opposed to it. We take what we've seen with history, and then we look forward, and we try not to repeat the mistakes of history.
Right, and I want to make a broader point, right? Because I'm old enough that, and I've come across so many of these theories, and you can say I kind of like past this phase of thinking, because like I said earlier, right, I believe that intersectionality, and I just believe that critical race theory and all this is kind of like an offshoot of these different ideologies, whereas intersectionality and those type of ways of thinking, to reduce everything down to racism, right, is disingenuous for one, and it's counterproductive for two, because there's nuances within the discussion that gets overlooked. And to the point that the brother made earlier, the whole concept of flat blackness, to reduce our ideology down, or to just black equals racism.
Do that in society. That's the issue. I think you're postulating a society that doesn't.
Brother, just give me a second, brother. Let me make my point. Because when you do that, right, it takes away the individual's experiences, right? Or we'll say collective. So take ADOS, for example, right? If you break our experiences down to just racism, or the history of slavery, Jim Crow is just racism, then that would give the impression that any black person coming here shares or even understands the experiences of ADOS simply on the basis of being black, because, oh, well, I'm a victim of racism too. I'm a victim of police brutality, or whatever it is, right? And so what it does is it creates this. I'm not familiar, right? If you familiar with the artist Rene Girard, right? But in well, he has a theory of scapegoat theory, and different other theories like the mimetic behavior. And what he says is, he said victimism uses the ideology of concern for victims to gain political, economic, or social status, right? And that's what you see. That's what you see with a lot of ADOS issues and whatnot. And critical race theories allows for that to happen. Things like intersectionality and critical race theories, it allows for you to play on the history of slavery, Jim Crow, or whatever, right? To create this all-encompassing ideology that's just reduced down to racism or bigotry, so that now other groups can come in and take from that well, draw from that well, or create parallel experiences to it. And what you see in the end is for their own political or economic purposes. It's not to address the issues of those people that went through those experiences, right? So it becomes counterproductive. So now you got intersectionality, whereas you see how it becomes, and this isn't a dig at these other groups, right? But now the issues of the LGBT becomes involved with the issues of ADOS, of black people, just black in general, or genderism and all that. And I think we just dumb down a lot of the conversations, and the conversations get dumbed down to just racism, and you overlook the nuances that needs to be addressed to really bring about some type of real constructive, productive changes, because there's other things that can explain our issues and not just racism, because like we said earlier, even during slave time, if you just look at the data, like we're kind of like going backwards, where at one time, even during slavery, you had ADOS black people who were freedmen. They were the freedmen, they had economic power. They had different things. And to just say that racism is the end all be all and we got to base all our decisions off of race, it becomes counterproductive, because one, it creates an inferiority complex with those people who are within ourselves as black people. It creates an inferiority complex, because now instead of when we go for whatever position, we automatically have in the back of our mind that, oh, they don't like me because I'm racist. It's not okay. Maybe I need to go back and review what I did and how I can do it better. And it creates a defeatist type mentality, in my opinion.
I don't disagree with some of the stuff you said there. I really don't. I think a lot of the stuff you make here, I agree with 100%. People does weaponize this idea of people identity to bring about their political satisfaction. People does that a lot, but we have to acknowledge that people are viewed in society based on their identity. There were laws in society that restrict that people should not be homosexual, people should not be. Why do you think they made those laws? Because they find these interact with these laws that they create. As I pointed out earlier on, there was some legislation last week in Texas and Arizona banning transgenderism and those stuff. So we have to acknowledge, we have to deal with reality. We want to be viewed as an individual, but there are laws in society that does categorize us. And based on certain categorization, people can be discriminated. So while I do agree with everything you just said, I think you also have to agree with what I said, because what I'm saying is practically true. People engage with their identity on a day-to-day basis. People are discriminated based on how they look, based on how they present themselves to society. And while we want to view this world as an individual lens, that's not the reality.
Can I interject 1 second to your point? Can I interject? While I don't agree that people identify with their group or with their identity, but that's still
that is not true. Kimi says she's a Christian.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, okay, if people are going to identify with their specific groups, as you stated, right, that would go against critical race theory, because you're saying that critical race theory says that people are going to identify based on race. But the reality is people are going to identify with what they identify with, may it be their Christian or may it be their economic status, whatever group they prescribe to. As black people, we don't all identify with each other. You may identify as a Nigerian, you know what I'm saying? You may identify as a Muslim. So to just bring it all down to racism is disingenuous.
Well,
I agree. We agreed on so much issue, but I'm trying
not
to
racing. Not I apologize. Not racism, but to just
where
reduce
do
it all down to race is what the
we?
problem is.
All right, the Black Commander, go ahead.
But it's an analysis for specific race.
Well, welcome to everyone to the panel. I'm a bit late, so I apologize for that as well. But in the topic at hand, I do not agree with critical race theory because I don't think you can just blame everything on race per se. Now,
That's not what critical theory does.
now, the conversation between Kevin and BO, I do think race is a factor, is a way people use to identify themselves and their group, and that plays a huge factor into your identity. So we can't just erase the that aspect of it and say it's more like race, religion, ethnic group, nationality. These are all factors that people use to identify themselves as.
Yeah,
Are you saying that
I
people
don't
doesn't
disagree.
shape a worldview based on the identity?
I don't disagree to the fact that people identify by race, but I believe that it goes well beyond that. So once people come to a basic understanding of race, we still live. America is still somewhat of a meritocracy, whereas there's going to be other issues, just socioeconomic status, your religion, different things of that nature, that's going to supersede race at the end of the day.
Well, of course. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but I'm saying
I agree.
Yeah, actually, I think Kevin can go on it. He has something to say if I cut him off. Sorry.
We agree on so many issues, but I think the point we are making, you're asking critical theory to do something it's not intended to do.
Kevin, I have a question for you because I really like specifics. So when you say people are still being discriminated based on their group identity in this age, can you give examples, specific examples in this age in 2021 where people are still being marginalized as a group based on their racial identity?
Based on their racial identity? Wait there. Is there saying based on their racial identity or based on their identity?
Based on their racial identity. Not just identity, I mean racial. Since we're talking about critical race theory, so race is what we're looking at here.
Oh yeah, so for example, after the election loss of Donald Trump, there has been many laws implemented in the United States, as some people would say, to limit or curtail the voting of Black people. And these laws of many racist rooting that seeks to disenfranchise Black people because they overwhelmingly vote for the Democrat Party. So that would be one of the way in which race play a factor, because there has been, I think, at least 26 of these laws passed to eliminate certain aspect that would curtail Black people that would prevent Black people from voting. And if you go to there's a lot of study done here. If you go to the criminal justice system, even if the FBI report say there's a lot of police department in the United States that play to the dehumanization of Black people. And though, I get the point that society evolves and we get better overall. The Civil Rights Act was a good step in the right direction, and society has get way better since that. But I think what people try to extrapolate from that is that society has get way better. That means society is at its ideal now. And what critical race theorists try to point out, that there's a lot of work that need to be done in order for us to create.
Could you give us examples of those laws, brother?
Opportunity, not equality of outcome.
Could you give us examples of those laws that they made specifically for Black people?
All right. So one of these idea is and you can fact check me on this, is from Georgia. Georgia, the law passed in Georgia was the most common one. So certain provision in the law state that one, people should not be given any items while they were in a line to vote. The one, secondly, the idea of the polling station closing extremely early. Certain polling station within the Black community has been shut down. So the idea is no laws in today's society is going to be explicitly racist. And if you read critical race theory, what it says that racism in its most potent form is not the explicit nature of the law, but the implicit nature in which we create this parity with using certain metrics. So for example, if you say that one, we are going to eliminate the amount of voting hours in which a person vote, this law disproportionately affect Black people because one, Black people work in lower income job. Therefore, they have less access to vote. So the less access they have to vote, the less likely they are to vote. So no laws is going to say, okay, we're going to target you race, and this is, but it's how the law manifests itself and create race.
Okay, let me just say this, right? And I'm not going to debate you on whether the laws, right, in Georgia, because I don't want this to turn into a political discussion, right? But CRT would suggest that the reasoning behind these actions is due to our race, right? Could it be whereas these actions are actually due to our political affiliation and our race has little to do with it?
No, but because the idea is, if you check the root of this and the terminology used in these laws is pretty much identical to that, the framing in which was Jim Crow. There was this thing that blew up.
No, but I'm trying to,
which the guy was literally, no, but we're saying, you know, this is what we're saying, like these laws.
I understand what you're saying, right? But what you're saying would imply that Black people are going to automatically be democratic, right? So what I'm trying to open up the discussion to as it relates to CRT is that we're using CRT as the basis of our analysis, right? So it would imply that the reason for Republicans creating these laws is due to racism and because they don't like Black people, right? Or whatever, racism. Yeah, but the reasoning behind these laws, if we observe them, it has less to do with racism, but actual political ideology. So if a Black person, the same Black person was voting for Republicans, then his race would mean less. Race wouldn't be as much of a factor in their decision. I'm pretty sure that those same people that made those racist laws would embrace the Black people. So to just,
all right, for example,
and this is the problem with critical race theory. It takes away the nuances from the conversations where we just see everything.
I think you're the one taking away the nuance from the conversation, because in order for something to be racist, in your opinion, it have to explicitly say race. The idea of racism in today's society, if the idea of plausible deniability is that you can invoke it come back to the idea of the Southern strategy, in which people placate to white anxiety to accomplish political outcome that they want. Like the Southern strategy was a thing in the United States in which we cannot discriminate against Black people overtly, so we are going to do it covertly. It was a thing.
Can I just interject to what you're saying, Kevin, real quick?
No.
So if we are talking about, now I'm kind of veering off a little bit from the discussion you're having with Bo, but if we really are passionate about empowering Black people, what does it do to make a Black person go into a situation and constantly look for that racism everywhere and see how the system is working against them? like in a realistic sense, and even I can say from my experience, because I had this mentality for 6 years living in the United States, it literally would make me very, it would weaken me. It just weakened me so much more. Paranoid. I would go out and I would go into environments and I'm already looking for, oh yeah, the band is, you know, they're putting me to the side of the stage because I'm Black and they don't kind of want to have Black people in the center. And I'm going through the day with all these micro analysis. And what does that do at the end of the day? I literally have higher stress levels. I have high blood pressure. I have all these stress markers that in turn affect my health, right? So this is one of the issues I have with critical race theory is, sure, we can look and say, oh, let's investigate whether these laws are made out of a subvert attempt at racism. But the kind of inadvertent effect is that we become so afraid. We become so critical, literally in like the horrible sense. We're like, oh my goodness, like that woman looked at me horribly because of racism. And I don't think that's a way to empower Black people. I'm so passionate about empowering Black people. In fact, my hoodie says is from a company called Skate Like a Girl. Like, I want girls to not be afraid of skateboarding, especially Black girls skateboarding in a white environment, because you don't have to look at all those markers. It doesn't reflect upon you. It is an insecurity that someone else harbors, but don't go looking for all of those things. So I just wanted to inject that into the conversation.
I agree with you 100%. And this is a fair criticism of critical race theory. Yeah, I agree with you 100%, because this, in my opinion, is the fairest criticism of critical race theory, is create white supremacy or whiteness as this ineradicatable force that we cannot remove from our society. I agree with you 100% on that. But we have to acknowledge that there is room for advocacy in our society. And when people should advocate based on what they need in society, I don't disagree with you there. But we also have to acknowledge that we have to tell people the truth. Like, we cannot make, because truth will make people feel a certain way. That means we're not going to tell them the truth, because while you might not feel the discrimination, there are people there who feel the discrimination. So we cannot say, because, okay, I am going to get rid of this mindset, that means this is what everybody should do and everybody can do. Not
okay,
everybody
can I come in a bit?
This discrimination like how we experience it. Sure.
Okay, so Kevin, I asked you about what specific laws are targeting Black people today, and you gave an example of the laws that were passed, the voter laws that were passed after the presidential election. I'm very, very familiar with that position, that talking point, but nobody has still been able to prove to me that it has anything to do with race. I mean, if you want to take Bo's logical reasoning, let me finish. You get time to respond. If you want to take Bo's reasoning, it does seem to me that if Black people were voting overwhelmingly Republican, don't you think they would have done, if this law is actually racist, if it's impacting Black people, don't you think they would have framed the law in such a way as to favor Black people to vote for them? And wouldn't that tell you that the motivation behind this is not really race? It is more politics. It is more, how do we get power? You understand? So a lot of these things that are termed as racial,
I agree.
A lot of these things that are termed as racial are usually not racial. They might have racial outcomes because somehow certain racial groups will sieve out to manifest or be disproportionately affected by that phenomenon, even when the initial goal wasn't a racial goal. So we have to take all these things into consideration. I think that for someone like Kendi, I think that Kendi is up to something. He may be defining something, but it certainly is not racism. He's confusing concepts. That is what I think is going on here. Certain concepts are being confused with each other. There is a problem, and I think he has identified what some of these problems are. but the definitions that is given to these problems, or that critical race theory is given to these problems, is what I do not agree with. So you can go ahead and respond.
Yeah, man. We can talk all day, and I think we would agree on a lot of stuff. I agree with a lot of stuff you said here, but I think you're accusing me of a lack of nuance, and I think you're approaching the discussion here also with a lack of nuance. This idea that we remove the history based on the current context in which we view law, like if, for example, this is what people say when you're creating laws to have a disproportionate effect on people. For example, we know that black people overwhelmingly vote on the weekends because that's the time black people get a day off. And you implement a law banning people from voting on the weekend. That is what people saying. That is, one, unnecessarily, and two, it's a racist law because it target while there are white people that vote on the weekend. This go disproportionately affect black people and disenfranchise black people. And this law have no other routine than to say that we ban weekend voting. That is the point I'm trying to make here. That there's not going to be a law that explicitly say we're going to target you based on your race, because that was the idea of the Southern strategy. How we eliminate this overt racism, but we codify it into more subtle and repressive form. So that was my point. Back to another point with the individual. I agree that we should empower individual to his maximum capacity, and we should tell individual, work hard, pull yourself up by the bootstrap, work as hard as possible. But we also have to identify that there are social struggle and structured here that disenfranchise black people, especially when it comes on to this idea of the drug war and how that was implemented to destroy the black homes. And these are social structure in which we live in, and black people will be freer with the elimination of these laws. So while I agree we should empower the individual, but we should also identify the structures that can disenfranchise in the individual also. So I agree with you 100%, Charles. And many of the stuff that Kimi says, I also agree with. But I think your analysis stops at a point, and I think it should go a little bit further. That is just my opinion.
So I think that's absolutely right, Kevin. Sorry, I'm going to jump back in here. The question is, how do we get to that society that values the individual, if that is what we value? And that is a question that I would have for you, Kevin, is what does your ideal society look like? The question I have is, how do we eliminate that nefarious social milieu that CRT talks about, that I think does exist to a certain degree and has certainly existed historically? Racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, any idea that permeates a society which denigrates a certain identity or a unchosen attribute, skin color, for goodness sake, hairstyle, curly hair. I've heard about curly hair discrimination. And so the question I have is, do we go to all of these critical theories, gender crit, literary crit, fem crit, CRT, or do we fall back on what I think has worked historically, which is liberalism, that fundamental acknowledgement that every human is just that, human, and ought to be afforded the respect, because you never know what value they will be to you. And you want them to cultivate themselves so that you can engage with them, and so they can engage with society, and everybody can get together on their own terms and be productive and be peaceful. What do you think about that?
Okay, let me get a crack at this. I agree. We agree a lot on stuff today, but I agree 100% with what you're saying. How do we accomplish or arrive at this society? I am not sure if there anything such as an ideal society. I was grown up in a very, very religious home. My mother was a avid Christian. She followed the Sabbath, she go to church, and I am from that school of tradition, and I do view society somewhat from a Christian perspective, and I do think to an extent in my early years of life that has limited my perspective, and since being in university that has somewhat opened up my perspective and say, hey, there are a lot of views in life, and there everybody come to the table with a different perspective. There is no one size fit all approach that we can ever have to fix all of our problems. So therefore we must look at a lot of what I say school of analysis or mode of analysis to get better understanding of our current reality. And for example, one of gender theory was stemmed from critical theory too. And we can criticize gender theory or how it has empowered women, if you want to say too much, but we can also acknowledge that a lot of the good that comes out of there's a lot of good that came out of the feminist movement and some empowerment of women and its mode of analysis in which he gave us a way of looking at stuff that we did not see before, and a lot of people take the good from it and leave the bad. And that is just my framework in which I approach life. Everybody have a different perspective. Everybody come to the table with a different perspective, and we listen to them and incorporate them. And I hate when people just throw this, what would I say, thought terminating cliche. I see it a lot. So when people tend to call people a socialist, they're not willing to engage with the argument that the person is proposing. They're just expecting people to know that socialism is bad and we should not become a socialist country, instead of engaging with the argument. I think that is the society where I want people engaging with arguments accurately, and I think at that point we get, better outcome in society.
I think that's absolutely right, Kevin. I think it's absolutely right. It's not good enough to simply take what your opponent says, their descriptor, as a signifier and write it off. It's not enough. You need to understand their perspective better, sometimes even better than your own, so that you can really understand why you agree with it, or in the case of your opponent's idea, disagree with it.
Yeah, I agree. Right. I was very homophobic when I was younger. Like when I was younger, I was very homophobic. I hated gay people. I hated transgender people. That's the worldview I had. I just think those stuff was very repugnant, and they should be cast out of society. Like, I think meeting a person who does not adhere to the heterosexual framework that we have in society, it kind of changed my perspective on life a little bit, to understand where people coming from and why people do what they do in life. So I think I talk too much. So I'll give the floor to somebody.
Let me say something, right? Because I believe that critical race theories, right, it works contrary. Although you have an idealistic point of view with it, I believe that it works contrary. Where in the end, what will result is that people will start it will kill the conversation and the engagement and the understanding for people to come to an understanding, because it will reduce everything to racism. So the conversations that need to be had, the nuanced discussions, it will get killed, because you would have to first, it's almost as though you have to work backwards, where you have to establish, okay, it's not about race. And that makes it harder to have a conversation. So if we take the example you used of the laws, you use that, you started that conversation off by it's race-based, where now we have to work back from if disprove that it's not about racism. You know what I mean? So it kind of like it kind of works counterproductive in that way to having real meaningful dialogue, because instead of us looking at it from the point of view like maybe it's not about race, and let's look at it from a political point of view, we lose that discussion. We lose the opportunity to have that discussion, you know. And I think that's the major flaw with critical race theory, is that by you predicating everything on race, it makes it hard to have those discussions. Because if we take in politics, stay within the realm of politics, look at how impossible it is for us to have a conversation about politics when everything starts off with Republicans are racist. This candidate is racist. You know what I mean? This law is racist. And it's like Donald Trump had to spend his first 3-4 years disproving the fact that he's racist. Everything he said was misconstrued as racism, or whether it was or wasn't. That's not my point, right? Like, I'm not here to advocate for either party, but just to have an ideology where everything is predicated on racism, and that's the basis, and that's the foundation of your argument, is, I believe, counterproductive.
Yeah, I agree with that, Bo. I'm not sure that it's ever going to be possible to get to a society that, to use a controversial term, is identity blind. If you know what I mean, identity blind. And by identity I mean unchosen identity blind.
But where does one exist in the world?
It has never existed. It has never existed. But I think it's important to have an ideal in place so that you can know where you are trying to get to. You may never get there, but it's important that it be your goal. And I'm not sure that critical race theory or critical theory in general has that as its goal. It doesn't want to. It wants to flatten difference. That's my reading, and I know, Kevin, you might disagree with that, but that's my reading, is that it does want to flatten
because
difference.
I think the reading that people have of critical race theory is nothing said by any critical race theories. I just find that, like, a lot of the statement people make.
I know you disagree on the reading of it, but like I said, I am reading Kendi's book, and I have listened to a lot of lectures and listened to a lot of stuff, and there's a large emphasis, as far as I can tell, on the erasure of at least material differences.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, we gave you, and this isn't any criticism of you, but we asked you to explain it, and this is what happens in a lot of critical race theory conversations with critics. It's like you can't explain it, but you want us to understand it. So it's kind of hard.
I've explained what about it have you not? I think I've explained it clearly. What have I said that wasn't clear?
Well,
it's not also important to realize that no ideology no ideology is stagnant. Critical race theory with Derek Bell was very pessimistic, and I know, Kevin, you disagree with calling Kendi as a critical race theorist.
No, it was a very, like, I agree. I think that's a major criticism of critical race theory. It's very pessimistic. I agree.
But I think it's moving away from that. I listened to a really enlightening talk that had Kendi and a few other critical race theory guys, and one of them, he's an older guy. He expressed clearly that it's not that he wants to emphasize the shared humanity of everybody. And that's something that Kendi does as well that I actually very much appreciate, is that he sees everybody as human first. And that, I think, is a wonderful liberal stance to take. However, I disagree with his further desire to flatten outcome differences. I mean, and he says so explicitly. I'm reading his book. He talks about differences in health outcomes. If one group, let's say, lives 3 years longer, Kendi would say that is a racist disparity. That is racism as a result of racist policy, and therefore there must be a policy to change the average life expectancy to bring those groups into parity in that way.
Okay, can I just come in a bit, Kevin, please? Thank you. I want us to wrap up this conversation in 10 minutes. It's a very interesting conversation, but I'm far away from home and I have to get home. So I believe we're going to do a part 2 of this because there's still so many other things that we've not explored in this conversation. So I want to thank all of you for coming. Kimi Katiti, thank you very, very much. Kevin B. Black, as always, thank you very much. Black Commander, thank you. Bo, thank you. Isaac Hoffman, thank you for coming. So let's just go one round and let's be done in 10 minutes. So the floor is open. Go ahead, Kevin.
Kimi?
I'll conclude, right? And I just want to make a general observation that I think we need to be careful with these type of conversations, because you have to realize in America, academia, and it's a $1 billion industry. So people come up with all these concepts of critical race theory, whatever it may be, to prepare their career, to sell books, to keep us in this perpetual cycle of just pontificating upon things that's not productive. You know what I mean? So we can't allow ourselves to be manipulated, and at some point we got to just get away from looking for answers and solutions through different ideologies. You know what I'm saying? And I just concluded with that, and I appreciated the conversation, and it was real productive. I think real constructive and productive, and really getting to an understanding of it. And take it easy now. I hope to catch y'all the next time.
Yeah, thank you, Bo.
Good to see you, Bo. Good to meet you.
Okay, brother.
Good to meet you, bro.
Kevin, were you gonna ask me something?
Oh no, I saw. I am subscribed to Brittany King, and I saw she made a post this morning stating that you guys will be live later.
That's right. Yep. Are you gonna tune in?
Definitely. As I said, like I listen to a lot of people. Right? I approach my analysis with a lot of perspective. I listen to a lot of people, so I will definitely tune in later to see you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, just a question to the panel. Kimi, well, this is my first time seeing you, and yeah, it was nice hearing your opinion today. So I was just wondering, what country are you from?
So I'm an American citizen, but I grew up in Uganda. My family is half Rwanda, half Uganda, and I lived in Uganda till I was about 10. Lived in Tanzania till I was about 12, and then moved to South Africa. And I lived in South Africa throughout all my high school years. So that was about 7 years. And then I've lived in the United States for 8 years.
Okay, well, that's interesting. That's quite the experience then.
Thank you so much. And where are you from? Is Isaac still here? Isaac, I know. Kevin, are you in Jamaica? Where are you guys from?
I'm from Jamaica.
Gotcha.
And
for me, I'm from.
Go ahead, TBT.
No. You first.
I'm from America. I live in Ohio. That's where I was born, and now I'm back after college.
Nice, awesome.
And for me, I'm from Nigeria. I'm from the east, but I live in Lagos. And before I came back to Nigeria 2 years ago, but before then I was in America for 4 years, in Houston, Texas. Then I was in UK for a year, just London, and I was in London for like 2 months, and then I went to up north to Manchester. Then Canada was just for like 2 years too. A bit of time in Vancouver, and then Toronto, and then Manitoba. But I'm back in Nigeria now, and yeah, I'll be here for a while now. So, yeah.
Awesome! Wow, we have a lot of background here in this conversation. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, Isaac, have you concluded, or you want to say something else? Kevin, have you concluded? You want to say something else before we round up?
I wanted to point out an interesting thing that I discovered thinking about critical race theory, specifically Kendi's. I know he's the guy to talk about these days, but I think Derek Bell would agree with this too. If there were no law at all, they would call it racist. If there was, think about that. If there was no law at all, it would be racist. And the reason I say that is because there would then be no state-mandated mechanism to redistribute, to equalize the situation, to commit redress for the ill-gotten gains that have that they claim have arisen from capitalism. So that's an interesting insight that I have that I wanted to just put out into the ether and see what people thought about it.
Okay, so Kevin, go.
Yeah, man, it was really good being here. I really enjoyed the moment. As I said, I was watching some of Kimi video the other day, and I do take some issue with what she says, but it was nice just having a discussion with her, just her to explain some more of her perspective. And I really enjoyed my time in here. And Charles, as always, thanks for everything.
Okay, so that's great. Thank you very much, Kevin. So as
Not
for
to
me,
interrupt.
okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Not to interrupt, but I wasn't aware that Kimi has a channel. So, what's your channel, please, just so I can describe?
Yeah, you can search my name, Kimi Katiti, into YouTube, and it'll pop up. The URL is quite long, but yeah, search for Kimi Katiti.
No worries.
So guys, please subscribe to Kimi Katiti. She has awesome content in her YouTube channel. That's how I found her.
Yeah, but Charles, go on. I apologize for interrupting again. Sorry.
Okay. So as for me, I'm in Nigeria. I've never been to the US. I've never been to the UK. I've never been to Canada. So but I do follow up with a lot of stuff that happen in the Western world. I try as much as possible to be abreast with issues, because I think that things that happen in the US has a way of affecting every other part of the world. They travel very fast.
Sorry about that.
You don't have to be sorry about that anyway. But that's what tends to happen. So I try to keep myself abreast of that. So it was a wonderful conversation I had with you guys today. Very, very fruitful, very, very productive. And I want us to have a part 2 of this, because there's so many things we haven't covered. So at least now I have an idea of what critical race theory is, because it used to give me headaches. I mean, I've tried to like make sense of it, but a whole lot of things I see about it is just vague. So when I saw Kimi and her content on it, I said, okay, I think this is the best person to bring on the show to tell us about it. So before we go, the last word to you, Kimi.
I am so thankful for this conversation, and thank you for everyone who hopped on to have like a vocal, verbal discussion of this. Thank you, Charles, for hosting me. I would say I think the question that Isaac posed was very, or at least the thought that Isaac posed was very, very insightful. But I would also ask that we take a moment to just kind of step away from the academics, and like again, I bring up Desmond Tutu, but like look at the lives of the people who actually have had the worst encounters with racism and with racist regimes, and maybe like just personally wonder and ponder upon like what outcome do they come out with, because I personally sense that there is a very it's very different from at least the critical social justice movement. And I mean, Desmond Tutu has a book that is titled No Future Without Forgiveness, and I think that's a very strong statement to make for someone who's been in the thick of apartheid, and it's been a part in overthrowing the apartheid government. So yeah, just that's my end thought with that.
All right, that's a very good note to end the conversation. Thank you guys. So see you guys soon. Kimi, I'll be binging on your content as well. I've been watching your content and I will keep watching. So guys, please subscribe to Kimi Katiti. Thank you all for coming. Have a great day.